Hi everyone, Isaac here from His Majesty's 10th Regiment of Foot. Similar to the modern-day army, the 18th century British military featured a variety of soldiers, each with a different job on and off the field. The army was an ecosystem, and each of its components were necessary to maintaining its functionality. Today, we're going to be discussing the special forces of the British Army during the American War for Independence, the Light Infantry.
I'm loading, you're done.
Welcome back to the channel, everyone. We think we have a great video in store for you today, so let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and please like and subscribe as it helps bring our content to a wider audience. As many of you know, I belong to the Light Infantry Company of the 10th Regiment. But what exactly does that mean, and how do our tactics differ from the other companies in a regiment? Today, I'll be diving into the origins of the Lights, their growth and role in the British Army, and finally, their tactics on the battlefield. So stay tuned till the end, where you'll get to see these tactics discussed with video footage of them in use. We won't be talking about uniforms today, but if that's a topic that interests you, I'll link a few videos and some brief company explanations in the description below. Alright, so before we dive into the details, I'll provide a little bit of background info. Historically, a full-strength regiment during this time period would have consisted of 10 companies of about 60 men each. 8 of these companies were the standard battalion soldier, the ones you may envision when thinking of the typical British troops during the time period. The remaining 2 were considered the elite troops in the regiment. The first was the Grenadier Company, the shock troops of the regiment, and the final were the Light Infantry. Grenadiers and Light Infantry were hand-selected from the battalion companies and were often among the best soldiers in a regiment. Battalion soldiers selected to become Light Infantry were the fittest, smartest, and best marksmen in the regiment. So what differentiated the Light Infantry in terms of their tactics on the field? Well, Lights were the fast-moving skirmishers, flankers, and marksmen of the British Army. They were granted a significant level of autonomy and entrusted with making informed decisions on the field. This autonomy allowed them to adapt quickly to changing situations and respond effectively to enemy movements. They moved quickly and decisively, using cover and spreading out to dictate many aspects of an engagement. Being chosen for a multitude of missions, they were the versatile elite force of the British Army. They played a large role in shaping many battlefields throughout the American War for Independence and paved the way for the use of irregular tactics in the centuries to come. Up until the 18th century, the use of light infantry tactics and formations were sparsely utilized by European powers. Documentation of Pandurs in the Habsburg Empire, the Russian Cossacks, Croatian Grenzers, and Prussian Jaegers are among the best documented usage of irregular soldiers on the battlefield. However, unlike Europe, which had been settled and farmed for centuries, North America offered more densely wooded areas and far less open fields. This made European-style close-order line combat with large opposing armies far less effective. Britain's first challenge in this new land would come during the 7 Years' War. Contrary to popular belief, the British Army was smart and adaptable. They recognized the need to change their tactics based on the unique topography of North America. Dedicated light infantry units were first introduced by the British during the 7 Years' War, following the infamous ambush on General Braddock's column in 1755, a whole video in itself. Compared to the American Revolution, however, their use was far less formalized, often evolving from provincial ranger units from the colonies. Nevertheless, a handful of dedicated British light infantry units did see combat during the 7 Years' War, and their capabilities were noted by British officers. Despite their successes, though, these companies were ultimately disbanded or returned to standard regulation upon the conclusion of the war in 1763. This was most likely due to the scaling back of British military spending due to the debt that this war created for London. The same debt which would become a primary factor for the taxation that helped trigger the American War for Independence. However, many who witnessed or knew of the light infantry's success during the 7 Years' War opposed this decision, with Cuthbertson writing in 1764 that it is much to be regretted that attention was not shown towards continuing some of the Light Corps of Infantry, whose active services deserved a better fate than being either totally disbanded or transformed into heavy troops, it being a point beyond all contradiction that an army in the field, acting either on the defensive or otherwise, cannot well subsist without such a corps. In this excerpt and in the following text, Cuthbertson is essentially saying that disbanding the light infantry is a bad idea. Not only because they were incredibly useful during the 7 Years' War, but it was inevitable that they would be needed again. He writes that, quote, their maneuvers demand a degree of practice, end quote, and that it would be hard to re-implement them quickly should light infantry be needed in a future conflict. Lieutenant Colonel William Howe and Major General Thomas Gage, who both served in light infantry companies in the 7 Years' War and would go on to be important figures in the American Revolution, also had interest in permanently integrating light infantry into British regiments. It's worth noting that Howe's light infantry were the first men to scale the Plains of Abraham in 1759, essentially ending the North American front of the 7 Years' War, what Americans know as the French and Indian War. In large part due to Gage and Howe's efforts, light infantry were reintroduced to the British Army in 1771 in the form of adding 1 light infantry company to 44 existing line regiments. They were specifically trained in light infantry tactics, which ultimately proved vital to their success on the field. Their uniforms were even altered to fit their new mission, such as more streamlined caps and cut-down coats, which helped them maneuver more easily through the dense North American terrain. This created one of the most effective fighting forces of the time, and they were customized for fighting in the North American landscape. 2 notable figures were critical in establishing light infantry doctrine: Lieutenant General George Townsend and General Sir William Howe, who I mentioned earlier. George Townsend's treatise, published in 1772, laid the foundation for light infantry tactics in the American context. Townsend emphasized the importance of speed, stealth, and agility in light infantry operations. He advocated for small, mobile units capable of swift movement and guerrilla attacks, avoiding direct confrontation whenever possible. Townsend's treatise stressed the significance of marksmanship, the use of cover and concealment, and the general importance of skirmishing and guerrilla-style warfare. He discussed the effective utilization of natural terrain, writing in his 1772 treatise that soldiers should learn to, quote, cover themselves with trees, large stones, broken enclosures, old houses, or any strong feature that presents itself upon the face of a country. He also writes about the importance of responding to a whistle, loading with a powder horn, maintaining a steady, irregular fire, and fighting in pairs, which we will discuss later in this video. Moreover, Townsend recognized the importance of training and discipline. He stressed the need for light infantry to possess excellent physical conditioning, marksmanship abilities, the ability to act independently and think on their feet. Townsend's treatise was widely regarded as groundbreaking work, shaping the early development for light infantry tactics during the American War for Independence. Building upon Townsend's treatise, William Howe wrote his own discipline in 1774, in which he further emphasized speed and maneuverability. This doctrine was drafted specifically for a 6-week training event held in Salisbury, England, in which King George was personally in attendance. At this event, light infantry demonstrated their versatility as not only skirmishers, but line infantry. Howe showcased this versatility during a mock battle which featured fighting in a variety of terrains, including woodland, hills, and houses. Howe's discipline emphasized the necessity of light infantry as a complementary force to traditional line infantry. He advocated for a balanced approach, combining the firepower and solidity of line infantry with the mobility and flexibility of light infantry. He stressed the importance of coordination and cooperation between these 2 types of units, with light infantry acting as a screen for the main army. Howe also focused on the importance of reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, enabling light infantry to provide valuable information to the rest of the army. In 1776, Howe introduced light infantry battalions, where companies of light infantry from multiple regiments would band together to create a larger, more formidable force of light infantry. Both George Townsend's treatise and William Howe's doctrines contributed significantly to the development and understanding of light infantry tactics during the American War for Independence. George Townsend's treatise provided the groundwork for light infantry tactics, focusing on mobility and marksmanship as well as the use of guerrilla tactics. Howe, on the other hand, refined these principles and created a more formalized framework for the organization and deployment of light infantry within the army and on the battlefield. The light infantry were considered the jack of all trades of the British Army. However, this role was not relegated to combat situations. Light infantry fulfilled a vast variety of jobs off the battlefield as well. Logistics on the North American continent were not an easy undertaking, and feeding armies who were often on the move was a significant feat in itself. When possible, the army relied on a system of local contractors, merchants, and food shipped from Britain. However, this was often not sufficient, thus the army would turn to foraging and in some cases, looting. Light infantry proved to be skilled at both, gaining an infamous reputation among the colonists as being the ruthless looters of the British Army. Looting became a big enough issue that British High Command gave direct orders to stop it, such as Sir Henry Clinton in 1780 ordering soldiers to be posted at the houses along the route of march to prevent the act and shoot anyone that attempted to loot. Light infantry officers were also often ordered to remain in camp with their men rather than sleep in houses, in part to monitor their soldiers' activities. Harsh punishments were threatened if a soldier was caught looting, but ultimately they were rarely carried out, as light infantry were scarce and at such a premium that officers weren't willing to hang or excessively flog their men. As I mentioned, light infantry were also adept foragers and were often selected to both forage and guard foraging parties. This type of food procurement was common in the British Army on campaign. In addition to foraging and looting, the light infantry often screened the army while on the march, guarded the camp, and ultimately held a variety of responsibilities in battle, from skirmishing to flanking and even acting as standard line infantry. So now, how do light infantry tactics look on the battlefield? It is worth noting that light infantry were adaptable, and often the tactics they used differed depending on the terrain that surrounded them. We will use a few videos from our reenactments to demonstrate how light infantry could have reacted in certain circumstances. Here, we see soldiers coming out of a tree line, quickly forming at extended order and briskly moving to confront an enemy. Light infantry often formed at extended order, kneeling or prone, allowing the soldiers to cover a lot more width than at close order dress and could therefore keep a larger force at bay. It also made them less susceptible to massed volley fire. While the light infantry used the same muskets for the majority of the war as the rest of the army, they were trained far more frequently at marksmanship and could skirmish from distances exceeding 200 yards. While fire may not have always found its mark at this distance, it was often accurate enough to slow or halt an enemy advance. Light infantry were taught to maneuver swiftly, moving at a march, a brisk walk, or advance, a steady run. This allowed them to get into position quickly to either skirmish or flank the enemy. Here we see soldiers, quote, laying upon their arms. This was the British Army's phrase for the modern position of going prone. They're using the incline of the hillock in front of them for cover. While this clip is a good example of the speed in which light infantry could deploy and use cover, something of note is that light infantry would often be in files of two to cover one another, as demonstrated in this clip. One soldier remains loaded, covering for the other while he reloads, and only fires once his file partner is loaded. Then his file partner will cover for him, and so on and so forth. This was called firing by files and was discussed by Townsend in his 1772 treatise. Here we see another example of soldiers moving into cover and, quote, firing by files. Finally, we see light infantry quickly retreating into a tree line and utilizing the cover given to them to halt an enemy advance. These tactics were incredibly effective and necessary on the North American continent. So effective, in fact, that soon after they were implemented by the light infantry, the same tactics were adopted and used by the battalion companies during the war. Even the Continental Army created their own corps of light infantry in 1777 and based their light infantry tactics off of British doctrine. Light infantry were critical elements of many battles during the American War for Independence. During the Battle of Long Island, the light infantry and their speed were used in a lightning flanking maneuver around Washington's left flank, which sealed the victory for Howe. In the Battle of Brandywine, the speed of the light infantry again was used in a key flanking maneuver on Washington's right flank, which proved key in forcing Washington to retreat. In the Battle of Germantown, British light infantry effectively used cover and the terrain to slow the enemy advance, leading to confusion and the eventual retreat of Continental forces. Finally, during the Battle of Monmouth, British Light Infantry and their excellent skirmishing abilities helped cover the British withdrawal from the field. So in conclusion, who were the Light Infantry? They were the fittest, smartest marksmen in a regiment. They flanked, skirmished, and screened for the main army. They were independent, using cover to their advantage and making battlefield decisions without needing directive from higher officers. They were the versatile elite force that set the precedent for soldiers in North America and irregular warfare in the centuries to come. Thanks for watching.
Give us
This could be you. Choose your path in one of America's premier reenacting units. His Majesty's 10th Regiment of Foot. Visit redcoat.org.